We are talking about short-term rentals, or STRs, today. A lot of complaints about these.
Another issue of the Irving Herald is off the press. First copies of Irving's newspaper were distributed the very day lots were auctioned off to start the city of Irving.
What are they? What are STRs?
Well, STRs are an acronym for short-term rentals, right? These are your AirBnBs, your VRBOs, your let's see, you can use. There's a variety of websites, but Airbnb is the big one, right? That's ultimately you can take basically a housing unit, whatever that may be, something that's designed for long-term occupancy, whether it's owner-occupied or for a long-term tenant, and then you are leasing this out as if it's a hotel.
I had dollar signs in my eyes when I heard the World Cup was coming because I thought I am going to rent my house out on Airbnb and make all this money for the World Cup. But then I thought, all these European rowdies are going to trash the place. So I decided
football
otherwise. And that's what's happening is guests are coming and disrupting neighborhoods.
Yes.
Lots of complaints about them. Complaints aired in public at city council of all of the traffic, the crime. Just the other weekend, 20 motorcycles at one property on the weekend. People doing unsavory things. Kids are looking over the fence. Yeah. So city council's gotten a lot of these complaints, and it's exploded in number. So especially post-COVID, there are a ton of these. And it started around 2013, steady rise. There was a bump pre-COVID, and then a COVID drop. But then post-COVID, we're seeing professional operators moving in where they're owning many properties, operating like a business, operating like a hotel, but it's not zoned for a hotel.
Correct. Yeah, it's not unusual to see, these professional operators. They might own it or manage on somebody else's behalf, right? Like these operators sometimes will reach out to maybe somebody that owns a short-term rental, but doesn't really have any interest in managing it, and they're managing sometimes dozens of these things.
Dozens.
I know. Yep. I guess my first exposure to this, I work in the insurance industry and I handle some claims, and I remember I handled a fire loss down in Fredericksburg, and this family had purchased a ton of these cute little houses in Fredericksburg, which at the time were, Fredericksburg was kind of a dot on the map. Nobody really knew what it was, and they bought these things for a song, right? Because it's just a little tiny town in rural Texas, and they revamped them and they were selling them as short-term rentals, and they were making a small fortune off of these houses.
Yeah.
Again, that's Fredericksburg. Obviously, we're talking about Irving. We are adjacent to one of the largest airports, not just in the United States, but in the world. It's clear that there is a huge demand for short-term occupancy here in this area. I mean, just the hotels alone, right? I mean, my Google search today indicates there's at least 85 hotels in the city of Irving. There's over 18,000 hotel rooms. So needless to say, there's obviously a very clear need and demand for short-term occupants just by looking at the hotels. We know that the demand is there. We know that people are coming and staying the night in Irving that don't necessarily live here permanently. But the question is how much do we tolerate this business model bleeding into our neighborhoods, right? If we stay at a hotel, we know what we're getting into, right? We know what we're staying. We know more or less kind of the people that we're depending on how much we're paying per night at the hotel, I suppose ultimately dictates more or less the type of people that we're going to be in close proximity to. But when you buy a house in a particular neighborhood, you don't necessarily expect to be
living next to a hotel.
Correct.
That's not what you thought you were in.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're expanding. I mean, these professional operators are expanding their operations. So this is why has raised the alarm of city council. There's all these complaints. We're in this great location, and there's no signs of this stopping. I've had bad experiences with these professional operators. One time in Kansas City, I checked into a room and someone was already there. Now, luckily, they weren't physically in the room, but I went in and I noticed there was other people's stuff. They had double booked the room, this professional operator, and they stuck me in like this closet with no heat, and I froze all night. Now I got my money back, but in Dallas too, I did a short-term rental, and it was not made up. And they're not, there's a difference between someone who's living there and renting out a room. Okay, you want to monetize your property, our great location. Yeah. Dallas tried to ban STRs and it got blocked in the courts. It's going to the Texas Supreme Court, and property rights, you can't infringe upon this. And that's why a lot of the discussion in city council is behind closed doors in executive session, because they're talking with the lawyer about what is possible and what is not.
Yeah, and I guess until this Texas Supreme Court rules on this, we're really not going to know kind of where to go with that, at least from a legal perspective. Because, on the one hand, I can understand like the argument that a property owner should be able to do with the property as he so chooses, but at the same time, a city that clearly has a right to place ordinances, based on what the expectation is of particular neighborhoods. Like a neighborhood has the right to fight for its character, for its quality of life, more or less, because that's, again, you're not just messing with somebody's business, you're messing with somebody's life at that point. And I guess I should preface this by saying that I use Airbnb a lot, like I do. I have a lot of young kids. When we travel as a family, I prefer to stay in hotels. I really do. Generally, if you stay in a hotel, you're getting a better, there's kind of a minimal quality that you can expect. Like if you stay at a Marriott, barring exceptions, you're going to generally get some level of quality that you can expect for the money that you're paying. But it is quite expensive, when you're traveling with a large family, especially if you want any privacy. If you don't want your kids sleeping on top of you at night, you have to get multiple rooms that are connected. And so traveling with a family, it does make sense, to rent a house, but at the same time, should these options be everywhere all the time without any restrictions whatsoever?
Yep. And at least now they're paying taxes. So city council a few years ago said you have to pay the hot tax. So I guess we can have hotels in residential areas that are paying the hotel tax, but we're getting money out of this. And if you want to know all about that regulation, it's irvingtx.gov/STR. It is funny, on that webpage, when I looked it up, it defined it as what is an STR? It's any single family residential structure, which is wrong. When you look up the actual ordinance, it's any residential structure. A number of these are in apartments.
Yeah.
It's not just single family. They need to change that website.
Yeah, they do. They need to be precise with their terminology, and
we don't even know how many there are.
We don't. Yeah, this is really, to me, it's kind of comical that as of this moment, Irving has 170 registered STRs in the city. 170. Now, to put that into context, there are approximately 103 housing units in the city of Irving. That's single family residents, duplexes, multifamily residents, and apartments combined, right? So out of 103,000, we only have 170 that are currently registered. I guess I just have to call BS on that. I think that there's quite a bit more. My hypothesis is that there's quite a few folks out there that are running STRs that are not registered with the city.
Yes, and the city will even say that. The city will say, well, we think there's up to 400. The difficulty is figuring out where they are. So we pay a consultancy to scrape the web and see what the listings are in Irving. The problem is it won't tell you the address until you actually book. It'll hide the address, and when you book it, it'll tell you the address. Yeah. So the consulting firm can't actually label precisely where they are. So we know that there's more than 170. Yeah. We think what was said in the work session meeting in March was 400.
Did anybody from the consulting firm think to call the state comptroller's office? Right. I mean, I'm curious to know that. And maybe they did. Maybe they did. I don't know. I did a little bit of research, looking into this. But Airbnb, like if you rent a property from Airbnb, you are required to pay the 15% hotel tax, essentially, and so 9% of that is supposed to go to the municipality, to go to the city of Irving, and the remaining 6% goes to the state. And there's also some sales tax and everything that has to go directly to the state as well. The state of Texas requires Airbnb to pay those taxes directly to the state of Texas, right? But the city of Irving does not, right? And so where's that money going? Is that money, if only 170 are currently registered, I imagine there's a lot of folks that are paying an extra 9% to the property owner that's not actually ending up in the pocket of the city of Irving, which is wrong.
And, our council members will say, we've got to go to Austin to deal with this. Certainly, Al Zapata, who's on council and is running for mayor, when he lists what he's going to do as mayor, at the top of the list is, we are going to get in the car, we're going to travel down to Austin, and we're going to say, look, we need some statewide regulations on this. We're thinking about what we can do, and there are proposals for what we can do. So in the March city council meetings, they came up with, well, we're going to regulate them more. Which one of the funny things they proposed was parking. We're going to say you have to park in the back, you can't park on the street. But that's actually only, we're going to require them to say that. We can't actually do anything about it.
Yeah.
We're just requiring them to inform their guests that they have to do that. That's it. So that is kind of toothless, but more regulation, and then 3 different proposals for new ordinances. A buffer zone like Arlington does, where they do it around their entertainment district.
Yeah.
A conditional use permit where you would have to get a change from planning and zoning.
Yeah.
And a clustering cap where you could only have a max of 10% on a block face. So these are the kind of things they're considering.
Yeah.
And I don't know which one you prefer. I mean, the people who really want to kind of solve the problem are interested in the conditional use permit. Now, that's going to give planning and zoning a lot of business. That's going to up the volume of cases.
Sure.
But I did find it interesting, the buffer zone, saying, okay, it's going to be around the urban center, because at the work session, Al Zapata said, well, you pull up that map, there's no dots, and there are none. There are none in the urban center in Las Colinas, because the Las Colinas Association banned them in 2017. So here's the city proposing, we're just going to have this, have all of them there. I don't know how that's going to work with the Las Colinas Association.
Well, yeah, I mean, I find that interesting too. I don't mean to go on a side quest here, but the city of Dallas obviously tried to ban them. And that's obviously been contested and is being heard by the Supreme Court. I wonder, has any plaintiff brought a similar complaint against the Las Colinas Association? I'm curious. And I mean, it's amazing that regulation, or that I guess you could say that requirement as restriction has stood for so long.
It's a really interesting question, and these legal questions we don't know, because they go into executive session and they talk about it with the lawyer.
Yeah.
And these things are so fluid. What is legal to do and what isn't. But it's one thing to put on the cap, to ban new ones, versus taking it away from people who are already exercising this property right.
Yeah.
So
I guess right now, if you want to have a short-term rental, go ahead and get registered now, so you can get grandfathered in the future, right?
Well, get it now while the getting is good.
We'll just edit that part out of this recording.
No, we do not give legal advice here. This is not any legal advice.
But
things to think about. If there is a ban coming, you might want to get in under the wire. And that's what, and Las Colinas did it very early, 2017. The problems really didn't show up until 2018 and beyond when they were expanding.
Yep.
But Las Colinas Association was right on top of that, and it makes it easier when from the outset somebody is getting a lease and they know the terms and conditions of free contract, and this is part of the contract. It makes it much easier to control it when you have that outright ban to begin with.
Yeah.
We have been slow on this. This is one of the complaints that has come up on City Council. There was a back and forth in a meeting from February at City Council about why haven't you done anything about this? Why haven't you done what Arlington does? I have one next to me. It makes life miserable on weekends. And the mayor said something like, well, we missed our window or something like this, which was unclear exactly what that meant. But after that back and forth, staff was coming up with these proposals.
Yeah.
Now the problem, if I could just say one more thing about the proposals, it just seems to me there's a difference between the professional operators, which there's a site, AirDNA, which tracks these, which has a handful of professional operators in Irving that have a ton of properties. That seems to me very different in terms of being rooted in the community, and you actually have neighbors, you care about what they think, and your guests coming and respecting the place, versus the professional operators. So my worry is the regulations. One of the things is jacking up the fees. Okay, what would that do? Well, that would pay for these extra code enforcers, two extra code enforcers, which we don't have room for on the third floor of the City Council thing. They're always saying we need to do City Hall.
Yeah.
But they would have these code enforcers.
Well,
okay.
You can just have them just kind of camp out in the the bottom floor. Just put some kind of just
don't get them started.
Yeah.
Don't get them started about needing a new City Hall.
Yeah.
They'll talk your ear off. The parking garage is collapsing. It costs tons of money. So but now, so what happens is, big business and big government, I'm seeing this in my head, right? The regulations and the fees for operating are high, and it squeezes out the little guy. Like, why shouldn't you be able to rent out your room as a property right in your residence, and you're making sure it makes it work with your neighbors? Charging a higher fee that now we're using to fund our code enforcement. So now the incentive structure is, well, we want more of these because they're getting more tax dollars from it.
Yeah.
And what about a tiered system? So other cities do a tiered system where you don't pay as high of a fee if you're actually dwelling there. If you're one of these professional operators, it's different, and we make you pay the big fee. Now, that's not something that they looked at. So I'm not sure why. They're not calling up the comptroller's office and trying to figure out who's paying the state tax.
Yeah,
so
it seems to me like a really simple solution because, again, there could be some maybe some dark web site where people are going and booking these short-term rentals that we're not aware of. But generally, Airbnb, VRBO, I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it. Is it VRBO or Verbo? I'm not
People
sure.
say different things. I don't know which ones. Right?
Yeah, I know. Booking.com, just there's a lot of different sites that everybody knows about. And so you think you'd be able to find them, on that. But yeah, it just seems to make sense that the comptroller's office has access to this information. Like, surely they could do this.
Fork it over.
This.
Let us in on it.
Yeah,
So there's work that needs to be done in Austin. So
I think
that's
so. Yeah, just better organization. Between better cooperation between the state government and the municipalities. That would seem to be like at least problem number one, right? Because right now it looks like we're only collecting taxes on 170 of these things, and I don't know. Again, anecdotal evidence suggests that there's a lot more than 170. Just because if they're 170, it's a very loud 170. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. There's legal limits on finding out who is doing this, and so they're trying to figure that out. Now, Now, the question of what is going to happen, well, they're working on these ordinances, and it'll come before one of the committees, the community committee of the city council soon when it's ready, and then it will come to full council. So this is going to come relatively soon. And then the next thing that's going to happen is an attention on split pads.
Split pads.
And split pads are seemingly single-family dwellings.
Wow.
But in the Irving Code, family is described as not more than 3 unrelated people in the structure. So split pads are, and it could be, well, we're getting roommates and we're sharing a house and it's legitimate. Or it could be, I'm operating apartments.
Yeah.
So that is next on the agenda. And that's also difficult to see who is doing this. But it's also changing the character of neighborhoods. If you think you're in a single family neighborhood and suddenly you realize, well, wait a minute, this is like apartments.
4 people that live next door, and they're unrelated, and they each have their own car, and they each have their own work schedules. I can just say, like, just driving through my neighborhood, you basically have 1 lane to get through the neighborhood because there's so many cars just parked along. That's got to be challenging for emergency vehicles to get through. There's definitely, again, there's definitely some split pads going on, for sure, because like there's, unless like this family has 8 kids and they're all teenagers with their own cars, I sincerely doubt that there's probably a lot of people leasing rooms out. And I get it, housing's expensive, and it doesn't really surprise me necessarily, but it is a problem, right? It is leading to a lot of over congestion. It is changing the characters of neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Irving already, this is not a new topic. I think this is one of the issues that families for Irving really kind of harped on from the very beginning. But Irving does have an occupancy problem. Like 2/3 of the city's housing units are occupied by non-owners. And it really should be the opposite of that. Nationwide. Usually it's about 2/3 of the occupants are owner occupied, the rest are renters. It does have an impact on the character of a city. It does have an impact on how invested the occupants of a city or the residents of a city are in the long-term welfare, the long-term prospects of how the city is managed, how the city develops. We're basically the inverse of that, and the proliferation of these short-term rentals does just compound the problem, right? Because you can really make a lot of money off these things. I mean, you rent out, a property, you're paying, you're charging a monthly rate, and but if you're renting it out per night, you can charge a lot more per night. You can really make some serious money, especially if you've owned the property for a long time and you're able to get in on the market, back before it was, crazy expensive. But it does only compound this issue of like how many housing units are available for people that actually want to buy homes and lay down roots here. It doesn't just change the character, but it changes the market as well as to the availability of single family homes.
You want to live in a place where people are rooted in the community and care about the community and care about their property and what their neighbors think. And this erodes that.
It does, yeah. So I think that the city, I don't think Philip or I really have like a definitive answer to this problem, but the city really does need to contemplate how it moves forward with this. I think that there's a lot of pros and cons to each of the proposed solutions. On the one hand, they talked about basically like a quota, a cap of how many you can have on a given block, and they're thinking a cap even as high as 10%, which to me
that's a lot.
Seems high. It seems really high, right? Because I don't know how many single family housing units are in Irving. Probably a third of how many apartments there are. We have just an absurd amount of apartments here. But that being said, yeah, if a tenth of those go up to be short-term rentals, which they very well, I mean, again, we're close to the airport. It is prime real estate for overnight occupancy, right? And I could definitely see that continuing to become a problem over time. And one of the things we really didn't talk about earlier is that the quality of the places that you're staying at. I mean, you mentioned before how well, if you go to like a hotel, unless it's just very poorly run, which there's a lot of very poorly run hotels out there, but generally there's a minimum level of quality that you're getting. But with these short-term rentals, I think I stayed at one not too long ago in Oklahoma City, and there was IKEA furniture, being used, which no offense to IKEA or anything like that, but this stuff was very flimsy. Like that, and that was one of my feedbacks. Like, my kids are gonna just destroy this furniture, It was almost there just to look at. You really couldn't actually use the furniture. It was just kind of there for the photos almost, and that's kind of what you get sometimes. In these places, you just it's not like you're really necessarily getting your money's worth.
We've all had experiences like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, the phenomenon of really being satisfied with your short-term rental, it's hit or miss. Maybe 50-50%.
Yeah, I mean, I also, I was in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, and rented my family and I, we all traveled, and there was probably 20 of us total, and we all chipped in and essentially rented a mansion in the middle of the mountains, and that was the most fantastic experience
and that was good.
in my life.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
that
exactly.
was good.
So there's obviously a benefit to that, to these really touristy places, to having options where you can stay, all together with your family, as opposed to, having everybody having to book their own hotel room or their own little KOA cabin, or whatever the case may be. So,
well, if you have a problem with a short-term rental near you, go to that webpage, irvingtx.gov/STR, and you can submit something to code enforcement. If it's on the weekend, you call police, and police can come. Noise disturbances, parking, whatever's going on, they can document it. But code enforcement doesn't work on the weekend, so that's how that works. And just wait till World Cup comes. Everything will be rented out.
Yes.
Come World Cup,
and you'll get to hear every language that ever existed will be in your neighborhood. Just everybody out to check out their favorite soccer team. But also, let your city council know what your preferences are for these short-term rentals. If you think that we need to stop the proliferation and put a real cap on it, or at least collect the revenue that's owed to the city for this, definitely raise your voice. Let them know. We'll be talking on this in the future, I'm sure.
That's correct. Not going away as an issue.
No, it's not.